Today, we're taking a look at the MPC Sample. This is the latest offering from Akai that was just announced today, and it is a super portable little sample-based groovebox. And this is technically within the line of standalone MPCs, but it's quite a bit more limited than the other current crop of standalone MPCs, and I'll get into that in a bit. But here's the thing. I want to make this clear. You've probably noticed a deluge of MPC sample videos hit your timeline all at once. This is a launch day video, meaning it is not a perfectly organic, like, I just decided to check this out of my own volition type video. Akai did not pay me, no money changed hands here, but they did send me a unit early and gave me a leg up in terms of content creation by letting me have early access to a unit. So that does mean that this video is a bit biased and just by existing is doing marketing for Akai, even if that's not my intention. What you are going to get from me is honesty. So I'm going to go into this thing not completely blind because I was briefed on like the basic features and functionality of it in advance, but I am going to go into this on camera, like showing you a lot of my first impressions as I go. Lots of other people are going to do polished videos, as will I, but I want to show you kind of the raw user experience of someone who has a lot of experience with standalone MPCs and sample-based groove boxes in general, but not with this thing yet. So let's crack this thing open and jump into it. Start guide, quick guide, USB-C cable, and then this guy. It's a little heavier than I thought it would be. Dude, it's cute. These are my hands for scale. The pads are quite little. Like, I imagine they'll feel okay to play, but they're very cute. I am charmed by the design of this. Let me zoom in this, and here's a quick look at the I/O. You've got 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, sync out, Midi in and out, which you would need a converter for, full-sized audio in and out, and that's nice to have. Recording gain for either the inputs or the built-in mic, USB-C, and of course power. So that microphone is this guy right here, and you better believe we're going to test it. Knobs feel pretty decent, and a little fader. All right, so to turn this on for the first time, all right, so there's like a starting project in here. That internal speaker is very quiet. Let me put my mic up to it so you can hear it. And I'll plug this into my actual audio setup in a second here so you can hear it better. But first, I was told that I need to update the firmware. So to do that, you plug this into your computer via USB, power it on first. Then, once your MPC is on in your web browser, go to mpc-sample.local, and it should prompt you to update the firmware if it like knows that it's on and connected. I've had some issues getting that to work 100% consistently. Like just now, I plugged this into my computer and the update portal didn't actually pop up properly, so I just unplugged it from my computer, plugged it back in, reloaded, and now it works. Also, when I did my firmware update, the website gave me an error, but then I plugged this back in and it said that the update was successful. So it's maybe a little janky. It's definitely taking cues from the Ableton Move method of doing things, which is not a bad system. And it seems to work at least enough for me to have successfully updated the firmware, even if getting there was a bit frustrating. Now that the firmware is updated and this is plugged into my audio interface, so you can hear it, I should also mention that I have already loaded sounds onto my micro SD card. Before you load sounds onto your micro SD card, first plug it into the device and it'll set up the folder structure. That is a necessary step, and so I wanted to make sure I mention it. Once it creates the folder structure by being plugged into the MPC sample, you can put it on your computer, load stuff onto it willy-nilly as you please. I just wanted to mention that right up front. So I've got some custom sounds on here. I tested loading one just to make sure it works, and now I want to start a new project. So you'll notice all of these pads have shift commands. So I can do shift, project, and scroll through our various options. I want to start a new one in this case. Clear everything, yes. I realize that the angle this panel is at makes it hard with the lighting I have to see these three buttons, so I've zoomed in here just to make sure that you can follow what I'm doing later on throughout this video. So these three buttons here correspond to these three like tabs up here. So this, and you can cycle through the different options. It's pretty like visually intuitive. I just wanted to make sure that you can see it because I basically had to choose between having these be visible and having the like shift text be visible. And you can see here it's not because it's reflecting off of my overhead lighting. The other thing I want to do right off the bat is put this at full level. For making kind of techno-y type stuff, I usually turn velocity off. So full level will make every note that you hit at the full velocity. So full level enabled. So the basic construction of this is that imagine this like one drum program on one of the more beefed up standalone MPCs. So it's still got banks. You can see these here. So banks A through H, which can all have a full grid of pads of sounds on them. And that's what you're going to use to build up your sequences. You can chain those sequences together in song mode. And while I do get a ton of use out of the like synth plugins on the MPC 1 and MPC Live 3, for me, conceptually, this is fine because I do often start songs just in one drum program. And in fact, that's what I recommend for beginners to standalone MPCs because I think it makes things a lot simpler. So in theory, I'm fine with that, but there are some very important caveats that we'll probably get into as we go. For now, I just want to load in sounds. So to do that, we've got a sample select button, and I'm just going to go straight to user samples, and then I've got some stuff. Whoops. So I have to switch this with this button to the external, which is my micro SD card. Now I can get to all of my stuff. So I'm gonna get a kick, and here's something that is interesting. By default, when you scroll through these, they just auto demo all of them. You can turn that off. That is my understanding that that's the way you would demo, is just hit this button to preview stuff. You can hold down shift. If you see this little arrow, that means that there's a shift command, but this is to eject my micro SD card or delete a sample, neither of which I wish to do. So I'm going to leave that one alone for the duration of this video. What I am going to do is just toggle that on and off, I suppose. I don't know if that's the intended use, but here we are. I wish there was a way to scroll through the rest of this name because a lot of these are tagged by the key that they're in. But in the absence of that, I'm just going to select one. And I've got that on the pad. I'm going to get some stuff from my own $5 sample pack linked below. So this is relatively similar to the sound loading experience on any other standalone, any other modern standalone MPC. Okay, that cuts that off. That's good. All right, so now let's mess with the sample a little bit. So let's go to sample, and we've got the waveform visible, and we can do things like control our start. We can zoom in by holding down shift. And that's shown here, by the way. Like if I hold down shift, it says zoom start, zoom end, and zoom loop. So by default, it looks like the loop is locked to the start point. It's also worth noting that these are not endless encoders. If this value is parked anywhere else, you have to turn the knob until you like meet it, and then it'll start to change. So like, for example, if I go to mix, my volume knob is turned all the way down, but the volume is here. So nothing changes until this meets it. And now I can change the volume, which is like, that's a choice. I think a lot of people will prefer that over endless encoders. I personally would have preferred endless encoders, but I might be alone on that one. We've also got an amp envelope if I cycle through this. So I can change, let's go all the way down, change the attack or decay. And the velocity sensitivity, which I'm not going to mess with here, but for something like a shaker, I probably will. It's also worth noting, it took me a second to figure out, you can loop this, so that's what this button does. So if you have a loop, that's where I presume you would use it. You can also choose for it to loop somewhere else. If I hold down shift, loop lock is a thing I can toggle on or off. So I need to turn loop on, I think, and then I can put this somewhere. So if you have a sound you want to like have ring out, you can do that. This is a horrible example, but hopefully you can see what you would use this for. I'm going to turn off loop for now and get this out of the way. Now would be a good time to tell you what these little icons are, because it wasn't immediately obvious to me until I thought about it for a second. So these buttons here correlate to these here. So for example, right now, this just rings out when you press the pad. If I turn it to note on, if I hit shift and then do note on, this lit up. If I turn that off, it goes dark. If a sound is reversed, this will light up. So if I do shift and then reverse, that lights up. This one is the loop icon. So if I press this one without hitting shift this time, it lights up blue because it corresponds with the blue button. And this will loop. Wait for it. And then this is indicative of 16 levels. The next one, we have tune. So this is by semitones. And fine tune, which is by sense. And then a warp, which I am told is like a fairly like rough warp. But it is here, which is kind of nice. I'm not sure what this does. Yeah, you can hear these all overlap, and I'm wondering if that comes into play with 16 levels, because that would be a welcome change. And then offset to have it start late. And filter. So this guy would benefit from a filter. Let's turn down the cutoff. We've got a few different ones. So classic, different low pass. This is probably more akin to what I want. And fortunately, a filter envelope. I gotta remember this goes the opposite of what I think it would. So you'll notice it'll show you, if you start turning the knob, which way you need to turn for it to catch up with what this setting is at. For now, I want this here, and I want this. Boy, that resonance is biting my head off. Cool, so that works how I would expect it to, and that is pretty powerful. You can also have this be note on. So it'll only play when you're holding down the pad instead of ringing out the whole sample every time. And in fact, what I should be able to do under amp envelope is then turn up that release. And let me mess with the filter envelope a little bit because I want the release to be up for that as well. So that's how you turn samples into synths. So I need to tune some of these. These do have listed pitches. But I'm mostly just doing this by ear very quickly. And then I also want to turn this down. Actually, I want to turn down this kick as well because it's got a little crackle in there, which I don't love, but right now I'm just going to deal with it. All right, let's try 16 levels. So that's monophonic, which is what I would have expected it to be, but... So I was a little afraid that the 16 levels would be stuck being monophonic. It's not. And I'm delighted that it's not. So here's the problem. As far as I know, there's no way to do like scales locked to the pads. So this is just chromatic. Akai, add scales to this. It would be an easy change. And if the goal is for this to be beginner friendly, I think that would be a very needed addition. Anyway, I'm glad that it's there though. That's good. So far, other than the loop behavior, I was able to figure out most of this pretty intuitively. So that's good. So if you ever want to get out of like the chop mode or the 16 levels mode or whatever, just like click it again. Same with the loop mode. So wait for it to ring out. But I want to get out of that. And I can also mute pads. Like so. Oh, that's nice. So I was wondering if there is a like solo button. There isn't. There is an unmute all button. So it's kind of the same thing. If you hit shift, bink, unmute all mutes are turned off. I'm wondering what type is. Do you just round robin through them? Type, filter, tune, velocity, filter, tune, velocity. So that's nice. I feel like you could like sneak some different scales and modes into there. So I'll use this for like the shaker, for instance. But for now, I'm going to stay out of 16 levels. So what I want is to record something. So sequence record, shift, tap for the metronome. So where does it tell me what that is? So I already know I want to count in, enabled. I want to check what my time correct is turned to. Oh, so the quantize is 16th notes, which is what I want. Okay, so this is for the grid of pads. So if you press one of these buttons, I think the do it will apply the timing correct or quantization to just the notes on that pad. What I want is the sequence. Here we go. So this is like some funky BPM that I wish to change. Let's just do 135. So this is the first sequence, second sequence, and my light died. Okay, well, that's fine. We'll leave this going. So let's get out of this for a second. I think this would probably... Yeah, this would set the BPM to be global, which actually in this case I do want. I want all the sequences to be the same tempo. So let me hold this down again. Set this to 135. Okay, so we should have a click. We should have a count in. I forgot to check how long this sequence is. 2 bars. That's your quantization. This is your real-time swing, which I might play with in a second. For now, what I want to do is go back to sample and just... Let's turn this guy down. I also want to make this a little bit shorter. So amp envelope, turn this up. And then I think what I need to do is shorten the overall sample. Okay, so here's an issue I've run into. These all sound fine. This kick, I switched out the sample and it's still clipping. Or distorting in some way that I don't fully understand. Like the sample itself doesn't do that. I've used this sample in other projects, so I don't know why it's like that. Ironically, when I turn it up, it sounds better. So for now, it's inconsistent. I'm just going to choose to live with it, and I'm going to investigate the compressor in a little bit. What I want to do is record. So sequence record, and then play, I presume. Yep. And then actually, let's get some filter action going on here. Make this more akin to a rumble. I'm wondering how well recall works. So if I hold down shift and then recall, so it recalled that sequence. Yep. Cool. I'm really glad to see that on a standalone MPC. They clearly took cues from like the Ableton Move and went, okay, we need to be doing that too. So real quick, let me take a look at the compressor. So I know this looks like the mother ducker. This is not the mother ducker. That was made clear to me and I want to make that clear to you. I think that's a missed opportunity. I would love to see an actual ducker in here. Like even though that might complicate things a little bit, I think it would be worth it, especially since things like the Innovation Circuit Rhythm have one and work fine with it. So this is on color. Oh, you turn color on a good amount. Is that better? I'm unsure as to whether that is better. It is better if I just bypass it. So I think what that's telling me is I need to turn this stuff down. Like all of these samples are processed, so I guess it kind of makes sense. Let me find this and just turn that down, and then just turn this whole thing up. Oh, my metronome is also on, so I can turn that off now that I have a kick that I like. So for that, I can just hold down shift and hit the metro button. So metronome when recording, metronome off. Okay, so what I want to do now is double the length of this sequence so I can start adding things on top of it. There's a button for it. So I'm expecting to see this go up to 4 bars. Very good. So now, let me just record something else over it. I messed that up a little bit. Let's see if it quantized it. Not quite. So I need to nudge one of those notes. So this will be interesting because there's not like a grid or a step sequencer for that matter. There is a tracker-like thing. So if I turn this, I think this is each individual step in the sequence and it shows me which notes are on each step. Bro, how am I going to find that? Well, this is pad A9, I presume. So I'm looking for pad A9. In this case, it might just be better to nuke it, because there's supposed to be a way that you can like shift notes around, and I don't know what it is, and I might have to check. Future Gabe here. I should jump in to mention that the pads light up as you scroll through the steps, so you can more quickly see what pads play during which steps. That does make this a bit more intuitive to work with. I would still prefer to see a step sequencer somehow implemented on the pads, but like it's grown on me a bit, especially once I noticed this. Okay, so I forgot about the fader. This is what nudges stuff in time. So you see pad 9 like switches places. So that's within one step. So if you want to have something be like subtly off the grid, this is how you would do it. But if I want to move this note entirely, I'm probably better served just erasing it and trying again. What's with that little like click? Hear that? I'm gonna choose not to worry about it for now, but that's bugging me. So then this guy needs to go away, I think. This is pad 11. So I'm looking for pad 11. Okay, so this guy, I'm just going to erase. This is kind of the Akai way, not to overgeneralize, but they make products that look nice. Like this thing is adorable. I think that is very worth mentioning. That often are more powerful than their price point suggests and have a few just major head scratchers of decisions. This setup is one of them. Like you're not really editing much in this thing. I would prefer generally to be recording stuff, which is fine. Like I like recording stuff over sequencing anyway, but this is a little clunky. I also want to see what's going on with this kick because I'm wondering if like the velocity changed or some automation got put in there by accident. There is nothing abnormal about this according to the sequencer. I wonder if there's like a double trigger. I mean, this doesn't think there is, but I might erase it. And can I like add this via the sequencer? Is that permissible?
A few moments later.
So what I was trying to do is find the kick drum that sounded wonky and replace it. But every time I entered it, it would have the wrong pad show up. It's because, so let me just demonstrate this. This is pad A01. I'm going to erase it. So now listen to this. There's no kick there, right? So I'm going to go to that step and input it manually. So it'll be the only step with absolutely nothing on it. If I hit sequence record, I was so confused because I'm like, well, that's not the pad I hit. That's not the same step. It advances by a step when you enter a step in, which once again is a design decision I wouldn't have made, but it's at least understandable. So like the benefit is if I wanted to say put this shaker in there or like this 808 style hi-hat, let's just do it. Let me press sequence record. It advances me a step every single time according to this quantization, by the way. So it'll just kick me forward a step until I am done. And you know what? Fair enough. And also I want to recall that because that's kind of good. Don't know why that didn't work. This is Gabe from the future. I should mention that this does have note repeat, which is this button right here. If you press it, you can toggle it, or you can just momentarily hold it down like that. And if I hold this down or indeed press it, I can choose my time division. So those are the straight ahead ones. Shift, if I just hold it down, don't press anything, I can select triplets. And then I can just select one of these again to go back to straight ahead. So this is velocity. I'll just cycle through until I get to tune. So I can do shift recall for that. See, that's definitely not quantized, but fortunately we can quantize it. So I want rec quantize on. I'm going to keep this for now. So what I want to do is go to timing correct. So shift, time correct, pad 12, do it. There we go. Music. I should take the opportunity to save this while I'm still thinking about it. So if I go shift projects, I can save. That's intuitive. If not a little clunky, but that's okay. What else are you going to really do? I can also clear this whole bit of text. I just chose not to. Do it. So this, we could maybe trim and then turn that down. All right, next up, let's add some effects because this is sounding quite dry at the moment. And this is where we might run into issues, and I'll show you why in a second. So let's look at pad effects. This is on the master. It's also based on pressure, which is another one of those baffling Akai design decisions that I mentioned earlier. My current understanding is that there's no way to like dial this level in any other way other than how hard you hold down a pad, and that is very strange. Oh, it's got a filter on it. I'm not really a big beat repeat guy, so I don't know if I'll use that much. So this is clearly taking cues from the SP404. And the idea is that like you can use this on your master for like performance stuff, although I think that often gets overused in these contexts. Or you can use it and then resample. So I could like mute everything but one pad, resample to bake in an effect, and go from there. I should mention right now, you can stack these and then hold them down with the latch button. So I've got one here, here, and like this will sound absolutely terrible if I do this combination, but if you're resampling and want to have a bunch of effects stacked, you can do it. Past me is going to proceed to forget that this is possible for a while and act like it isn't. And so feel free to yell at your screen until past me eventually remembers that this is in fact a thing you can do. The other one is knob effects. My current understanding is this is one singular effect, and you can apply it to each pad. I might have to check the manual for exactly how to use this guy.
20 minutes later.
Okay, so right now by default, this is a low pass filter, and it shows it very briefly. Shift effect select will take me to the full list. And there's quite a bit of stuff in here, which is nice and impressive. Let's do a tape delay. It's on everything right now, which is not what I want. So I can add it to my basses. Here's the problem. My current understanding is you only get one of these at a time. If I want to like bring these samples to life with a bit of both reverb and delay, you can't. This is, I think, the biggest missed opportunity on the entire device. Because on something like the Innovation Circuit Rhythm, which in conjunction with the Circuit Tracks, I've done full live sets with, and so that's mostly sample-based, reverb and delay together, plus like some distortion, bring a lot of life to otherwise pretty static samples. In this case, you are forced to choose unless you want to apply an effect to a sound and then resample it, which won't necessarily sound the same. Your ability to use all these great effects is limited. Like, hey, there is a pumper in here. I think I alluded to that earlier, and a limiter, but you don't get to use it and have a reverb. I would love to see, anyway, even if it's not intuitive, the ability to select multiple of these effects to be implemented. If I apply a bit of soft clipper to this, I want to see if I can just resample this one pad. There's a resample button here, and I want to see what that does. Resample, sequence, select pad. The whole sequence? That's not what I wanted to do, but that looks like that's what it did. So let me go to sample again. I need to turn this off. Jeez. Oh, so it did load in that kick loop. I didn't want it to be a loop, so what I'd probably have to do is go and delete all these notes. And in fact, good lord. Oh, it did do the whole freaking sequence. All in this one pad. First of all, I'm going to just undo that. So this guy, I'm going to mute everything except for that kick. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to erase the kick other than the first one because I just want that first kick, right? Okay, behold, a kick drum. So now I can just resample this whole damn thing onto this pad. And now that soft clipping is baked in. And it's probably still applying it, so I need to turn that off. So let me do this. And do that. So now the soft clipping is baked in, but it's not applying anymore. So So this guy, I don't need that to ring out that long. So let's just end it here. And then I can like re-record this. And then I can go unmute all. So I'm thinking there's definitely got to be an easier way to resample this stuff. Let's go to sequence and select a new one and just make this 2 bars to give it some time to ring out in case it needs to. Now I can record any one sample into it, add an effect, resample it, and not have to like mute and unmute everything every single time. That's probably a much better way of doing this. And this will give me the opportunity to test out another feature. Let me just record this in. And let's look at flex beat because this is also in here. And this is another global thing. That did something. One shot versus loop. Oh, so that holds it down. Okay, that's the behavior I expected. That's kind of fun. I like silly noises. Okay, so we'll leave that going, and then I wanted to use that auto wah that we found earlier. So let me go back to effect select and apply it just to this guy. See, I could just do it with a filter envelope, so that's not exactly what I wanted. Let me add something else to it. Okay, so I've got this doing something that's kind of fun and silly. So this is pad 15. I want to go shift, resample pad 15. So that's not resampling pad 15. That's resampling the entire sequence onto pad 15, to be very clear. So now I can get rid of that effect and turn off flex beat. So now it just sounds like that. I'm going to go back then to my first sequence. I think I saved over something that I meant to keep. Oh yeah, because this was serving a function in the beat. I'm going to roll with it for now because this is for the purposes of experimentation. So I'm just going to erase this. And then if I want to, I could like trigger this at the very beginning. And it's got those effects baked in. I'm going to undo that for now because I haven't tested chop yet and want to give that a go. So this lives just within the one pad, which is kind of similar to how it's set up on the Novation Circuit Rhythm. And by default, it just auto chops it, but I believe you can change that. So let me see what my shift options are. Oh yeah, chop type, here we are. There are regions, which is just splitting it up evenly. And then you can do manual. And then I think you can edit those by selecting them. So I want to change the start of this. So if I zoom this in, or if I hold down shift, I can zoom it in. Dude, this is going to get so iterative so quickly. So let's zoom out of it. I don't mind that as is, basically. And I can still do things like mess with the amp envelope, which is good. Filter. Oh, that'll be kind of cool in this case, because what I can do is have this rise untethered to what the rhythm of that is doing, because it's baked in here. Turn the depth up. Yeah! So that's kind of neat. But the sample's quite dry. It would really benefit from a reverb and delay. So I suppose if I wanted to, what I could do is make a new sequence. Go back to sample, turn on chop. And now I can go to my knob effects. Well, I want to shift select knob effects. This is going to nuke all my other chops, by the way, but in this very specific case, I'm fine with that. So I want delay to apply to this pad. So now, shift, resample onto this pad again. And behold, we have made a sound.
The next day.
I took a bit of time off camera to tinker with this thing and try to lean into what seems to be the intended workflow, and I've got some findings. So for starters, I kind of recreated the beat from yesterday in a different sequence. And one of the things I did was program in a shaker part into the step sequencer. So let me go to an empty sequence and actually confirm. I just want this to be 1 bar long. So go back to sample. Step edit. Make sure this is at the beginning, which it is. Sequence record. Let's hear that. And now I can adjust the velocity. So I want to make sure that this is the one selected, because what I initially did was I had like a 4 on the floor kick. And then I went to the first step and immediately started adjusting the velocity here. But that's for A01, which is the kick. And so I want to make sure I have my shaker selected. So now I can adjust the velocity here, scoot it forward, make sure that the shaker is selected, scoot this forward. I'm going to leave that at full. And in this case, I just chose to kind of manually go through and just approximate what I need. This will get us a shaker. So now let me unmute something. So this is played in with the filter moving around via 16 levels. And I'm just playing a very simple little part, and it's super dry. So let's bring in effects with the way that this device seems intended to be used. And I do want to mention, it was told to me that this is meant to kind of harken back to the classic MPCs. And you can see that with the design. It's like a classic MPC shrunk down by 50%. And if that's the case, I do apologize for my ignorance here. I'm very familiar with the current standalone MPCs as like full-on music production stations, but people familiar with original MPCs are likely familiar with something very, very different that shares overlapping functionality and layout, but is different to use by a large margin. That's my guess. I am 28, so didn't really grow up with that stuff. I have immense respect for it and what iconic producers could do with it. I'm just not personally familiar with how the classic MPCs are used beyond like the very basics. That being said, let's do some resampling. So here's what I did. I muted everything except for that bass. So I'm just going to do this quickly just to guarantee everything's muted. So I've got a 1 bar pattern, remember. So let me go to pad effects, I think, and dial in like a little reverb and hold down latch. Good enough for demonstration. Knob effects, I require a delay and make sure it's on this pad. Cool. And then I can also get flex beat involved here. Let me see if I can remember which one I used. There it is. So that's a bit more pleasant to listen to. But before I resample, you'll notice there's like a reverb and delay tail. And I want to preserve that. And so to keep that, what I did is go into sequence and bring this from a bar to 2 bars. So it gets some time to ring out. And that's really important to this whole thing working and sounding smooth. So now let me remedy one of my other mistakes from yesterday and go back to sample here. What I should have done, instead of just resampling like a pattern onto the pad that played that pattern, I should have like used my other banks that I have access to and sampled it onto a new pad. So I'm going to preemptively press this to go to the next bank, or I can hold this down and select a bank. It's hard to see on camera here, but this sample slot is empty. So what I can do is resample this sequence onto this pad. Shift, resample, select the pad that I want it to go onto, and I know this one's empty. Now, and it rings out. So I can now get rid of flex beat. I can turn off my knob effects, and I can turn off the pad effects. So everything's dry again. And now I can do shift unmute all and return more or less back to normal. So now I can mute this guy. I can go to pad bank 2 and I can record this guy in. And I can return this sequence back to being 1 bar long. Not perfect. It's a little janky, but like hopefully you see where I'm headed with this. And I've done this exact same thing a few times. So here's another example. I've got this ARP thing. Very simple. And then I put some reverb on it via the pad effects, which remember affect the entire master. So they affect everything playing. That's why I muted everything. Also because I'm going to resample the entire sequence. And the knob effects where I applied a delay just to that ARP part. In this case, I don't think I ended up using flex beat because it was a bit much. So let me go back to sample, toggle that off, and show you what that sounds like in context. Once again, you hear that reverb and delay tail. I also did a bit more normal, just resampling to bake effects into a one-shot sample. So this guy, I ran through the amp sim, and then also ran it through a reverb applied to just this, and then resampled that, which sounds like this. And then I've trimmed that sound a little bit and made the attack a little gradual. I also added a few more elements, like this little wash of ambience that I made for a different project and just threw on the SD card in case it was useful. A ride. And now, all that together, I can start to build into something bigger. So I wanted to keep my 1-bar pattern around in case I wanted to iterate on that further and have it be a little sandbox. So what I did is went to sequence, and then I can just do shift, and then here's copy down here under erase. So that copies the sequence I currently have active, and I can just drop it in somewhere else. So here's the version where once I had this, I can do shift to double the sequence. So that's 2 bars. I can do shift to double it again to 4 bars, and then added a few more things, and this is what we get. Nothing groundbreaking, but hopefully a decent proof of concept for what I believe the intended workflow is. It was a little bit finicky, but not unpleasant. I also want to mention, as I was moving about the MPC, I remembered that the fader exists. So my understanding is that it's mapped to one thing at a time, and we can test that assertion right now. So I think by default, it's mapped to pad volume. So what I was doing, like a goober, was going under trim and adjusting the pad volume here, and I was going to that every single time, where I could have just been doing this the whole time. And if you hold down shift and then fader here for this pad, you can change what that fader controls. So for me personally, I'd probably leave it on pad volume for the most part. You could also do something like pad filter cutoff would be pretty useful. So like, let's just do that. So for this guy, you can hear I've got the delay knob effect on it, which will, if I change the knob effect, that'll change everything, but you get the idea. So let's make the filter cutoff like do something. So let me turn up the depth of this envelope and the decay. So you can also record automation. And so I believe all it takes to record automation is just to move a parameter while you're recording. So let's try it. So it kind of freaked out on me. See how it like snapped up there? I'm not sure why that happened. I'm wondering if this got moved at some point. But regardless, let me check how to erase all that automation and try again, because I know you can.
6 months later.
Okay, so if you automated something with the knobs, you use the knobs for this. If you automated something the fader, use the fader for this. You select the pad, and then you hold down erase and move the fader, in this case, or the knob, depending on what it was. Do it. So now I'm hoping I can just record this with impunity. Excellent. that does work. So that is baked into this sequence. But if I wanted to keep that delay that happens after that, I would have to resample this whole thing. Up next, let's test out the internal mic. So let's go sample, record, hello. Okay, so that's simple and understandable. That's good. All right, let's do the bit again. See if it works better this time. See, now that's content right there. We can take the opportunity. Oh yeah, that's very distorted. I mean, that's fine. Like I'm literally just basically blowing into this tiny, tiny microphone. What I do want to do is use chop. Oh yeah, here's chop type. This is what I want to change. So I want to do it by manual. Okay, and now I can adjust those as I please. So a couple things I can do here. I want to filter this down with a bandpass filter maybe. Let's just try it, see how that sounds. It kind of cleans it up a little bit. I want to have this fade out a little bit more. And then let's go to pad effects and then latch. So now if I go back to sample, we can do, and I do want this to go from mono to poly. Actually, if we want to get this involved as well, we could bring on like a delay. So let's just do all pads for now. Go back to sample, 16 levels. That's fun. Let's try. I do like that little wind up sound. All right, so this needs to be poly as well. And then I would probably just take this. Well, because it would get pitched up and down on 16 levels, I'd probably like record a melody with this first and then resample that whole thing. In this specific instance anyway. We can make this sillier though. Oh, that's right. I forgot you can stack these. And that is nice. What I do want is the amp sim. And so let me go back to sample. Get rid of this for a second. I think I've overcooked it. It's a good bit. Like, that's actually a sick sound. It's also very silly. While we're on the topic of sampling, I also want to take a look at sampling into the MPC sample. So I have my Roland MC101 plugged into this via a 1/4-inch cable. And if I go to the input configuration, you can see I have my source set to the rear left input and monitoring is on. So now we can hear this. And also, let's say I really like that little lick I just played. If I do shift and then sample recall, it'll drop the little buffer of recording time it has into the next available empty pad. So if I bring this forward, you can see the little waveform here. So it's kind of always recording so that if you need to capture a bit of audio, similar to how you would capture a bit of Midi with the sequence record recall, you can do that, which is maybe a little unnerving that it's always listening, but a handy feature in this context. You'll see this setup again in a little bit when we talk about MIDI later. Up next, let's test the USB recording, which actually I tested off camera just to make sure it works, because otherwise this section would be very anticlimactic and then I would just tell you about it. The reason I say that is because on the MPC Live 3, it's supposed to have like USB recording, and it did not work with my Google Pixel 5a, which is a bit of an older phone, and like it seems to work better with iPhones rather than Android phones. But on this, when I tested it, it worked perfectly. So I just want to show you that. Anytime I hear a sound I like, I'll just record it with my phone. I rarely carry a handy recorder around with myself because I forget. But I found these singing bowls and I'm like, this is fun. Let me sample this. And so if I go to Shift Input Configuration, I can change my source, make sure it's on USB. And my monitoring is auto, which I believe means it's supposed to be on. So if I go to sample record, I should be able to hear this. Yep, so there's this little one and then there's a bigger one. And this is what I want to sample. So I'm going to like select a pad. Nope. It being a phone recording in public, there's some background noise, but this is something. So let me turn this guy up. It even did like an auto threshold thing, which is perfect. So I can probably take this one and then turn the decay like so. And then we can do some effects. So let me do a guesstimated amount of reverb, granulator, a chorus, like a tiny, tiny bit, because why not? So if I go back to my sample, that's kind of cool. It's a bit chaotic, but hopefully you get the idea. So you can sample songs from your telephone, or in my case, usually stuff I find in the wild and record. After finishing up this session, I took a bit of time off camera just on a Saturday morning to make a new beat, which ended up becoming the beat that you heard in the intro, from scratch on the MPC Sample. The process was pretty much the same as what you've already seen today. I just was a little more deliberate about it and was mostly pretty patient with it. I quite like how this turned out, so let me play that full version for you right now. The initial setup to this is pretty simple. We've got a kick, a self-made rumble, and then a bunch of like percussion and synth one shots from the creator Isobutane. Just a bunch of fuel for me to play with. And then on the second bank, I've got resampled versions of a bunch of these things. And this was run through FlexBeat. So a lot of reverb and delay and a bit of granulator, and I'll show you the settings. This is the same bass sample, but an octave up, because I resampled it actually by accident and ended up just pitching it up and using it as an element that really ties the whole thing together, actually. I'm also, since these are resampled sounds with a bunch of reverb and delay, I'm also taking the opportunity to now cut a bunch of lows using the filter, because that's kind of freed up. And then this guy you probably saw, I'm automating the cutoff. This is for my $5 sample pack, as is this. And this is like the driest sounding element. I probably should have gone back and resampled that, but like it was so late in the game that I was like, ah. I also have very subtly layered in here this little electric guitar, this as a sub bass, layered with the rolling bass line, ride cymbal. And all of that started on a 1-bar loop, because I wanted to do some kind of specific stuff in the step sequencer, which includes this clap, which I just took like a single instance of, and I can show you that in trim. I wanted to have that hit slightly before the kick, which if I go to the step edit and go to the step that has the clap on it, which I believe is this right here, if I make sure that this is selected, you can see that I've moved it around with this, and that shifts it forwards or backwards in time. I'm going to undo that. And then I've also done the same thing I showed you earlier, where the velocity of this is programmed in to fluctuate over the course of the steps. And I recorded the bass pluck in with 16 levels on filter. Something like that, if I recall correctly. Once I had these like dry, unprocessed sounds to play with, I started sort of figuring out a groove. And then once I started resampling that with effects baked in, that's where you get this kind of stuff. And I was able to build up the groove using that and then layer yet more stuff on top of it. And that's how we got the track that we ended up with. I should mention, there is a song mode in this. I don't know that I've touched on that yet. In order to use it, go to Shift and then Song here. And then you would basically just select your different sequences. So this guy, insert this guy, and this guy. And then you can like mess with the tempo. You can have it go for more than 8 bars. In this case, I just want this 4-bar sequence. And in fact, the version of the beat that you heard is the render of this that I've then mastered just to show you like how far you can push this to like finished song territory. It's missing stuff like sidechain compression. Some of the elements would benefit from some extra effects, but it's a start. As someone who has done a lot of resampling on some of the other standalone MPCs as a method of sound shaping or even sound design, I was able to get into a workflow where you're forced to do it with not too much friction. There was a certain point where I started just leaving sounds dry because I got tired of resampling stuff. I think front loading the resampling, like getting a bunch of sounds loaded in, processing them in similar ways, so like reverb, delay, maybe a bit of distortion, a bit of chorus, something like that, and then resampling a bunch of them in quick succession, and then kind of coming up with parts after the fact was a lot better than doing it incrementally, which is what I would normally do on a more powerful device because it's more flexible. So it was fine. I found myself leaving sounds dry later on because I just like didn't want to interrupt my flow to resample yet more stuff and kind of isolate those sounds. And that's maybe a me problem. I didn't get along super well with the SB404 Mark II when I tried that out. And that's, once again, a me problem because there's nothing wrong with it. But it does add friction, and I want to make that clear. That can be totally fine, and we all have to like pick what kind of friction we're comfortable with dealing with in order to work in the way we want to work and get the results we want. And while I definitely had a really nice morning making this little tune, I can't deny that there were little moments of annoyance that cropped up, as there were a few things that just had a little more friction than I would have wanted. Anyway, abrupt pivot. Final thing I want to test is Midi. So this is set up to be chromatic on the sample pads, so not in 16 levels, just in the pads themselves. And if I go up a pad bank, it goes up in pitch. So a couple important things to note in order for this to work properly. First of all, if you go Shift and Midi config, you can set the pad Midi out to all or empty. So if it's on empty, the only pads that will trigger Midi notes that get sent out of the device will be the empty ones. And so for instance, if I go into here, that doesn't trigger anything. If you set it to all of these pads will trigger stuff regardless of whether there's a sample on them, which to me is less useful. So personally, I would pretty much always choose to have it on empty. So now I can trigger notes on, in this case, my Roland MC101. And I also have the monitoring turned on. So regardless of whether I'm in like the sampling window, I can hear the MC 101 through the MPC sample, which is what you're hearing right now. The other really, really important thing that I need to note is the kind of MIDI adapter you'll need. At first glance, you would think that this MIDI adapter and this MIDI adapter here are the same. They look, other than this little duct tape, identical. They are not. There is a type A and a type B for these little adapters. This one is type A. This one is type B. So I started with this one and it didn't work, and I spent a bunch of time troubleshooting it until I finally swapped it out for this one, and this one did work. The type B adapters I have tested did not work. The type A adapter that I tested that I know definitively to be a type A adapter did work. So if you have one of these adapters laying around, which if you're a hardware head, you probably do, I'd recommend testing it, but if it doesn't work, it may be the wrong kind. So that's the MPC sample, and I've got mixed feelings about it, and annoyingly, not a lot of firm conclusions, which is a bit of an anticlimax for a video this long, and I do apologize. But on one hand, I'm glad it exists. I've been kind of begging Akai to make a much more portable standalone MPC for quite a while, and in theory, I'm perfectly happy to work mostly within one drum kit on one of the other more powerful standalone MPCs. So that's totally fine. Like conceptually, I'm all for it, and I like the design. I think it's cute. It's got some clever stuff and some really nice features. On the other hand, I kind of don't really know who it's for. I think the main people it's for are people who feel like the modern line of standalone MPCs have been victims of feature creep and have way too much going on and are unfocused and not really hearkening back to an older kind of workflow. And so this is, I think, something that's meant to be both modern and a bit of a throwback. At least that's how they seem to be selling it. And if that's you, you'll probably get a lot out of it. If you like the idea of a sampler that is simpler in the way it's laid out and still has some of the modern conveniences you'd expect from modern gear, you'll probably get a lot out of it. And if you're amenable to like an SP404 workflow, you'll once again probably get a lot out of it. If you're like me and you don't think that the modern MPCs are bloated and you like all of those like extra features and use them hopefully powerfully to make like any imaginable genre of like hip hop or electronic music, for instance, I'm not sure how much I'll use this. Eventually, I've been told the intent is for you to be able to export projects from the MPC samples to the other standalone MPCs or the MPC software, which would make this kind of a cool portable sketchpad that you can then expand on those ideas with a lot more plugins and tools and tracks later. That would be probably more my use case, although that is coming from a position of someone who already has an MPC Live 3, and most people probably don't need to own both. I am slowly paring down my gear collection because I got too much stuff and I don't like clutter and too much like replicated functionality across a bunch of gadgets that are just sitting around gathering dust. But I like the idea of using the two devices in tandem, or like using the MPC sample to kind of feed into a bigger MPC. That's not a thing yet, though, so I'll talk about it when it is a thing. As it is, it's clever, but it's frustrating. And I would love to see some of the effects stuff beefed up through the ability to have send effects or a ducker or anything like that that would allow it to be something that stands on its own a little bit more than it currently does, at least in comparison to some of its competition. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you'd like some more MPC stuff, I've got you covered with these videos up over here, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit. In the meantime, once again, thank you.
Meanwhile, at the Krusty Krab.